Okay, so we're back building out this form library that, uh, at the very least, I want to use for myself, but also learn about different libraries and different approaches to building forms in Vue. In the last couple of sessions, we built out a form that is fairly good for submission and detecting multiple submissions and blocking out the form as it's submitting or whatever action that it's doing. We built out then our buttons and added some different types of buttons. We might expand on this a little bit later by adding different styles beyond the sizes. And then we played around a little bit with form data and converting the form data into a JSON object that potentially we could submit to a server or do whatever we needed with. And that was this, where both of these fields are named company name and they're processed as an array. But if there was just one field, so let's just say company name and get rid of this one, then I would expect this to just be a direct key value pair instead of an array because there's only one of them. And this would catch stuff like multi-selects and checkboxes, for example. And then I guess there were a few paths that we could go into. I wanted to play with a library called Vee-Validate that does validations, but beyond that, it really structures how you handle your forms and adds multiple features that you can access as well. Creating an input layout. So this is something that we can have sort of these nice form layouts out of the box. So we're not fiddling with form layouts every time we want a new nice looking form. And this is from Formulate. Vue Formulate has this nice little layout that they describe on their page, and I want to see if I can recreate some of that using Vee-Validate. Test our form data to JSON. So we did actually do this. But maybe there's more we could have investigated here, but I think that's fine for now. And then, yeah, button variants. That should be secondary, not whatever this is. So having different button variants, so secondary color, an outline button, a link styled button. I really actually want to do this, but we just did the sizes, so I want to do something different. Building form components, that's just doing more, right? Like having inputs, obviously, but also selects and maybe toggles and whatever else types of components that would need. And then maybe getting some of this into Storybook, because I find what I'm doing here is sort of having the multiple options on a component and being able to document all of that for use, even if it is just for myself. Making the component library exportable or importable. And this is something that I haven't really done before with a Vue library, so that'd be interesting. Probably digging into rollup and seeing how it compiles into an exportable library, the Vue code. And then something that came to mind as well was trying XState to manage form state instead of using Vue concurrency. And I might not get to this. It is fairly complicated. We'd have to get into not that it's complicated, but we'd have to do a lot of that work that Vue concurrency is happening to do for us because it manages state as well. So let's get started with maybe playing around with Vee-Validate. And so, well, I'll open up this 10-minute tutorial and the examples. I guess examples they take a look at. Okay, ads, great. Okay, there's a few different examples here. Checkboxes, custom inputs, so you can build your own from scratch. Async validation, cross-field validation. Okay, cool. Array fields, which is super important. So it's stuff like this. I would have expected the sandbox to have loaded. Okay, there it is. Where if you have multiples, so you add a username and email, and you can add another user or add another user and build out sort of an array of objects or just an array of inputs and have that all handled for you within the form itself. That's great. custom checkboxes. Well, this will take time to load, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's a bunch of things that that you can do and manage. Great, this is custom checkboxes, which you could probably manage toggles like this as well. And there's various ways to do it. So they give you these components for field and form and error message, field array, but then they also give you functions that you can use in the composition API view. So maybe we could get started with copying really the 10-minute tutorial and playing around with that a little bit and then expanding from there. And not just using it as it is out of the box, we also want to mix it in with the work we did before with view concurrency. So we'll be replacing the form essentially in our random form component with, so instead of just using a plain old HTML form, we'll start using the form component from Vee-Validate and still have all that work that view concurrency is doing for us still apply. I have some uncommitted changes, which is form data. I guess what I'll end up doing is just stashing that because I don't really want to commit that work because we're using Vee-Validate and it will handle it for us. Okay, so let's take a look here. Well, add it and get, yes, let's do that. Okay, and then it wants us to start off with a new component and add in a form. So this is just the normal form. Yeah, and it's going through all the stuff we went through earlier in the first stream, which is when you submit it, it adds to the URL. If it's get, if it's post, it submits and refreshes the page. Submit.prevent in order to prevent that from happening. Adding validation. So I guess it's covering validation really, but it does it step by step, where first we start using these form and field components, and then we add validations to them. So maybe let's start by grabbing these components here. So we have a form and a field component. I will replace this so that it's using that form component specifically. Some things will be a bit different now. We no longer will be passed in an event directly. What it will pass us is the values. So your onSubmit or your submit function will accept values, and that's the values that are in the form. It also wants us to replace our inputs with fields, which is actually something we're doing in app.view. Over here, we just have an input. It wants this to be a field. So I don't actually want, get rid of that and get rid of that. And save. So there will be some issues here because event is no longer being passed in. So I want this to be values and change that to values as well. And then instead of this is really, it's really record, a string and unknown. I don't really want to call that an unknown, but let's just make it any for now. This will be values, that's any, and same thing. Make that any as well. And then in our function here, change this to values. So we're no longer getting that, that event. And I will, yeah, I'll leave this as is and I'll output the values here. Okay. And I will have to change this to field. Oh, I did already. All right, amazing. And that should be it. I should be able to play around with using Vee-Validate as my submission library. E.prevent default is not a function, and this is in Okay, so oops, let me go back here and just make sure everything is legit. So in my form library, I have a submit.prevent, and I don't want to do this prevent because Vee-Validate handles this for us. So let's go back and resubmit. Huh. Okay, I just had to refresh the page for some reason. Still that issue happening. I really didn't dig into it, but let's see. So if I say hello here and I submit, I now get what we sort of did with form data by converting form data into a JSON object. Let's see for curiosity purposes what happens if I add another field with the same. So it will do this where this has a sort of V model or reactive binding to the company name field. And as I change it, it is being changed in both fields. So you won't get those arrays as you would otherwise. Okay, so that's fine. Let's get rid of that. But we do have the Vee-Validate form working, and it's giving us the values. Let's play around with the validation aspect as well. Okay, I'm supposed to be here. It says create a function called validate email, and they have this regex here. Yeah, you know, why not? Let's go ahead and copy all of that as it is. And that would go. So what's interesting here is I'm not just implementing form directly here. It's going through that random form. But it should still work. So that would go here. Let's call it a function and define it this way. And then they want us to use it. Okay, well, they haven't used it in this example here. They will bring it in and use it as the rules on the field itself. So let me add that here. Okay, they're telling us to try it out, so let's do that. I'm not reading every single word, but I think it's just an idea of what's happening. So if I click submit, it's not submitting, like it's not running. Well, it is submitting, but it's not running our function here. So I'm not seeing the values being output. And the reason for that is doing that validation. So if I change this to hello@example.com and I submit, that works because that validation is now preventing the form from being submitted. We don't have any error messages being displayed, so let's take a look at that. They have an additional component called error message. And okay, we pop it in right below, and I guess it will display the error message if any exists. So let's do that. So right below our field, and I'll have to import it. Okay, now we go back, submit. This field is required. Fantastic. Let's have some value in there. Now it says the field must be a valid email. And okay, great. Now we have this working. We have validation working. We have the library doing the work for getting the information in the form, the fields of the form to us. Let's add a different field that we don't validate. Just add it here and just call this location. Why not? And I don't want to validate. And I submit, so that still won't work. But if I have a proper email, that submission works, and I'm getting both those values. Cool. Maybe let's take a look at how they handled arrays, and we might be able to look at how they handle selects and multi-selects as well. I actually don't know how they do it by default. So let's see if they have any options here. Dynamic validation triggers, array fields, checkbox in radio. That's interesting that they don't have selects here. So maybe we'll just have to build it. That's interesting. I would have definitely expected some example even. Maybe I could just take a look for a few seconds. Okay, that's just again showing how it's reactive here. Custom inputs, and this was the checkboxes, I believe. Oh no, they have they're managing it through just want to close this. Okay. They're using form. So there's a different way of doing validation. That's through the schema method, which is probably where we'll use a library like Yup or Zod, which they recommend as well. Okay. It seems like here they have made their own text input components. That's using field and being a wrapper around field. And then these things, I assume, some of these are probably being passed in directly into that field component, and these things are being managed otherwise. So let's actually just take a look here to see how they're doing it. And we might have to eventually copy some of this as we're building out our own input layout. Okay, that's interesting. They're using the use field function here, which is the composition API way. The way I want to do it, just so it's a bit more simpler, is I want to use the field component and write a wrapper around it. So we'll see how that works out. Okay, so maybe we can go with the arrays and replicate the array aspect, and then later on we could take a look at how selects are done. And even this, I think I can either look at the code right here. Let's see if that's straightforward enough. Otherwise, I'll just take a look at the docs. Yeah, I think this will be fine. This will be fine, and this will work great. Okay. And they're using Yup over here, which is pretty great for validation. Okay. All right. Let's do that. And we'll just keep it simple, perhaps, just in, or we might just copy this example. That's fine. Okay, so we do it here in our main application. And we'll make it so that you're adding multiple companies. How about that? There'll be emails. I want to see what happens if we just use rules within a field array. And we'll see how that works out. So we want to use the field array component that they give to us in order to create arrays within forms. And then let's wrap that here. Oops, I don't want that. Just want to close it up. And then I want this inside here, and I'll take these components. So let's say each company has a name and a location. And they want us to do a V4 inside, and our fields are inside that v4. I don't necessarily have to use a field set. I'm going to call this companies instead of users. So that makes more sense. And I'll just pop in a div here instead of the field set for now, just to demonstrate that it's really just any element. And then we want to do a v4. And so the v slot here passes us the fields that Vee-Validate is managing for us, and functions in order to either push a new item into our field array or to remove an item for our field array. And so we'll build out both here. And that's it, really. Okay, so let's do that. Let's add a button. I'm going to use a random button, of course, and I would have to do type button here because I don't want to submit the value here. So we'll say something like plus company. So add a new company. And that should be good. I actually want this outside the v4. It shouldn't be inside because it's not part of the object itself. And this here, I would say something like field and index of fields. I know they're using in fields, but I will use of. And then the key will be field.key. Great. And the way to hook this up is the name of the field will need to contain the index, and this value will need to represent an array here. So I'll just copy that bit, I suppose, and convert this into this, and then just call this index because I used a different variable name. And I believe I will have to do the same over here. So let's just replace, oops, copy that, and then replace. Okay, I don't know why I keep pressing the wrong button. Replace that. Okay, good. And then let's grab, okay, it's not supposed to be users, it's supposed to be companies because I changed the name. And we'll need to do that the same thing for the location itself. So let me just copy that bit here and bring that over here. And oops. Okay. Get that going. So now this is a string and it has the index. I want to see if all of this still works. It does. I mean, I guess it works in a sense because I don't have any companies yet. So let's take a look. Let me put, so this submits the whole form. Let me just put this into a div so that it appears below. Really using all the formatting here. And let's just hack some spacing in there. So here I should be able to click this button and add multiple company forms. And right now this does nothing. So let's take a look at how they suggest us to do that. So on click, we push the object that we care about, and that should work. Okay. And look, they've used type button as well because they don't want to submit the form. So let's go ahead and say at click equals, we're going to use push. In my case, instead of pre-populating, I'll just put an empty object in there and see how that works out. If that doesn't work, we'll go ahead and add something. Okay, great. So now I'm able to add these fields. They don't have labels, but you know, we know in our heart what they are. These are the locations and these are the names. I won't worry too much about the styling for now. Let's just play around with it. So if I refresh, cancel that, and if I say name, location, as I tabbed out, it's already done validation for me. There's a way to disable that so you don't have to necessarily deal with that auto validation. If I submit, it doesn't work. And if I change this into an email, submit, that works fine. And companies, which was the name of the field array, is now an array, and that has an object of company name and location. If I want to add another one, next at example.com, new location, and submit that, what I'm seeing here is 2 items in the array, and it has the fields. So this is a great way of making it really simple, I suppose, to manage arrays in forms for entire objects. There are a few other things that you can do. So for example, if this was something like a setting, and you wanted a setting object that the company name is in, so let me save that. Setting as well here. I believe this should work. So if I say name it example.com, LOLOL for the location. And if we look inside here now, the company name is inside a setting object and the location is outside. And we could have the whole thing in there as well. So it's fairly flexible in terms of what you can do with it and how structured you can get with your objects. If you're dumping your form data into something like a Firebase or a MongoDB, you could just grab that entire object and save it as it is, which is very useful. You could also, let's say even with a relational database, if you were doing a join to get the settings, but wanted to save them all in the form as it is, and in your server, you handle that settings for a specific company saved in a different table, and everything at the top level is stored inside your company's database or your company's table. That works great as well. So this is pretty cool. We have random form using Vee-Validate. We've integrated it with everything that we'd built before, so we're not losing any functionality. It's actually enhanced. Let me go ahead and add that remove button as well. And this we will want it to go in the array because that's where it belongs. And we'll want to use the remove function, and we'll probably pass it in the index, I believe. I wonder if I can look at the function shape, and yeah, it is the index, so I don't have to look at the docs. I can just pass an index here. We'll just call it, just make that minus and say remove. And now I can add multiple ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is just to demonstrate which ones are disappearing. So if I say remove, 5 and 6 remains, remove, and 5 at example.com. Another one saying 7 at example.com. And submit that, and that works great. Let me remove this one and submit again. And now I just have that quad 6 location. So now you have remove and add working. And we haven't done a whole lot of coding to make this work. It's fairly simple. I know Rails has something similar, but it shouldn't be too hard to make this work with the Vue and Rails situation if you're using Rails just as an API backend. And that will still work with the rest of Active Record and how Active Record handles relations and saving the whole thing in one submission. All right, cool. One of the things I do want to do now, perhaps, is writing our own wrapper um, around uh, the field in order to just, have a label right off the bat. Maybe I can demonstrate what I'm talking about. So Viewformulate has a great description of this, which is this. So their input consists of a label. There's two locations for labels. I would suspect that in a case of a checkbox, you might want that label on the flip side instead of before. And so you'd have that. They have a place for help, a place for the errors to display. And this way, everything is magically managed. We don't have to define an error message for every field that we have. It just works out of the box. That way I can use different types of fields and know that the error is properly displayed and everything works nicely. Okay, so let me think about that for a second to see how I want to structure the code. And I know that they had an example here with their own custom inputs, although they use the composition fields, which I don't want to do. Okay. Okay. All right, let me go ahead and use this as an example. I wonder if they have an actual form example. They do over here where the label's up here in the... Okay. We might have a similar API, but the API really is just fields that would, or just attributes would pass into the field component. Okay, I guess I'm just thinking a bit too much. I have done something similar in the past, but that was over a couple years ago. So, okay, let's just get into it. Let's go ahead and what I'll start off by doing is just copying a random form, and I'll make this random input. And this can be our input fields. Just get rid of everything in here. And the reason I'm putting empty in here so it doesn't, do this after the formatting works. Yeah, I don't think I think I do want inherit to work here, so we'll leave that as it is. And this here will... I'll see how I want to replace this. And then let's take a look at the documentation on Vee-Validate for their field component. And this will give us somewhat of a better idea on how we can use this. Well, actually, maybe I don't need to get into it too much. Here they have a description of how to actually do it in a select. So I'm a bit surprised they didn't have that example, but here it is. Okay. Okay, so let me just think. Just looking at this and saying, okay, I'll probably want like field. We'll probably go in somewhere here where our actual input is, because that's what's representing the field or the input component. Help, going before and after, errors. Okay, let's just do it. So I'll start off with a div here. that will be the whole thing. I'll want a label. And right now I'm just doing some scaffolding. I want an input here and right. Errors, I know that's not a real tag. And then help as well. Why not? Let's do the whole thing. And we'll figure out specifically how to fill these out. So I will want some of this. I won't filter it here, but I do want error message because that will be this component. It's not doing a lot. I wonder what it ends up outputting. I know I want a name in here, and this might be something like props.name because I'll grab the name from the props field, which I don't have yet. And then this will be field, and similarly we'll have name that will use props.name. I think that should be good enough. Just have that and don't need this. And I know that I used define props somewhere before. Just over here. So this will be name, and it is a string. And allegedly, I don't have to import it. It's just part of, the import will be compiled in. So when I do something like this, message is just available to me right off the bat, so I don't have to do props dot. So let's get rid of that. The label will be for name, I guess, or we could probably have a different ID. I wonder how Dave did it in their example of the custom input. So let's take a look at that. I don't have to figure everything out just all by myself. Right, so they have for, and they're using name, and they're using the ID as the name as well. I don't love that right off the bat, but that's fine. Let's go ahead with that. So for can be name as well, and we'll have an ID here of name. Okay, they're pulling in the type as well, which I can do. And placeholder, that makes sense. Yeah, why not? You know what? Let's go for it. We'll deal with the value a bit later. Type is string, and placeholder is also string. And then I can pop those on the field. All right. This should be enough. Actually, we'll want a label as well. And now we can do some fun things. But let's say you have to pass in a label for now. And maybe we can change this up a little bit later. So that label will show up as it is. And now they got this little p tag here for the error message. So they're not, I guess, do they have the, yeah, I don't think they're importing sort of anything for the error message, even though I am. And let's see how all of that plays out. So let's go back into our app.view. And now here we can, I don't need to import anything because I'm using magic imports. So this field, for example, I should be able to replace it with a random input. So let's do that. Random input. I do need to pass it name. I don't have rules on here, which I didn't really think about applying, and we can think about that in a second. I don't need error message here anymore. I'll need a label, and this could be like company name. Okay, let's see if that works. We haven't really styled anything much here, and we'll get into that in a second. It seems like my input is here. Right, so the classes are the class is being applied to this div so that the inherit it's being inherited there, and this is the actual field. So let me see what I can do about that. Well, I suppose part of the whole reason I want a component is I'll take the easy way out here and just define it here. And now that styling for the field applies here. This label should appear above the field for what I want. So I'll just make this a block. Everything is centered, which makes it look a bit awkward. So let me fix that here. So everything shows up here now. So I can just maybe decrease my form size or my browser size. And then okay, that's fine. Let me add some padding to my form itself, just so things can start looking a bit nicer. Okay, I would have expected this whole thing to be padded, and I wonder why that's not happening. Maybe I need to refresh. Okay. And I did need to refresh, and seems like some weird things are happening here, and this whole thing is, so my styles are a bit messed. That's fine. Let me just figure it out what's happening here. I have some issues here. Okay, help is not a required prop placeholder, so placeholder should not be required. Let me actually fix that. And then, I can just get rid of this. I know that I need to place it there, just so I don't have any errors pop up. And type is a required field. Okay, can I do something like type.value is equal to type.value or text? Type is not recognized. I guess I can only use that in here. That's fine. So by default, we'll just say type or text. And type can be optional, just like placeholder. And now we're not getting any errors. Always nice to sort of get rid of those off the bat. Let me fix this here. Not loving it. See why those styles are the way they are. So I got space X for, that's probably it, right? So if I just do that, because I'm doing a space X and these are one after another, which is no good. This doesn't really apply anymore, because each one of these is like a block now. So I could just probably so I got company name up here. Let me remove this and maybe put this into a div. so that it blocks itself. Trying to see why this space is happening. And what I'll start doing is, I mean, I don't know if I'll want this ultimately, but I'll just put an MB4 here. So there's some automatic margins to my fields. I don't like the size of the label, so I can maybe make that a bit smaller. Add a little bit of margin below. Still keep it pretty close. Now that's looking like a nicer field that can be reusable. So let's figure out why the rules function is being passed indirectly to my div up here. That's fine. Where is this space X? Okay, I think I didn't really remove. Yeah, where is this space X between these two? Ah, it's over here. So I don't need this anymore either. Maybe I'll just leave this empty for now. So just get rid of it. Okay, so now this looks nicer. I've gotten rid of all the irrelevant SpaceX. Maybe just add some margin here so that when the company button has a little bit of space. And now because these are all divs, just wrap this in one as well. I mean, you don't necessarily want to do something like this, but just for now. All right, so now at least everything is aligned, so I don't have to get upset. That was really bugging me, just the alignment itself. All right, so I'm adding companies, and I won't have, so submission still works because I won't have, so this should just be empty. And that at least is working. It's picking up, so from random input, it's picking up companies, settings, company name. So if I give it a name of company, for example, and submit, I'm getting that information in there. So we know that our wrapper for the input is functional, like it's working. What I probably want to do is to get the adders, and for the most part, pass the adders into here so that rules can get passed in there. And I believe if I define something as a prop, it no longer shows up in the adders. But let's find out. Huh, I could have sworn I did a whole thing with adders. Use adders, not define adders. Okay, good. So I've got my adders here, and I do want this bit, even though I removed it when I copy pasted stuff. So let's do that. And so not everything will be passed into here automatically. And let's pass it into here. So now I would expect, well, I would have wanted it to work to start. So let's see what this error is. Random input. Use address is not defined. So I wonder why they did that. I wonder why define props is compiled and use adders isn't. I'd rather just have it all be imported. But, you know, here we are. Okay, so all of that works. If I just add one and I submit, now my error is working. Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. So let's see what this thing is. It's a span. They give it a role. Maybe I can just make this smaller and make this bigger. I don't love it. I like more coding space, but if I'm recording my screen, I guess this is the way to do it. Okay, that's fine. I should be able to pass in a class in here. Maybe I can make it a block. So it shows up down there. And then I could probably do a few things like I want to do something like text read 600 or 700 or what have you to make it an error, appear as an error. It's a bit large, so let's do text SM. And let's add, let's give it a small padding up top. I guess it's could be a margin as well, but I try and make margin be bottom as much as possible, just so there's no collapsing margins. But let's see if that still is fine. It is. Yeah, I'll leave it as a margin for now. And that looks nice, which means that errors are now by default, yeah, by default a part of our component. And I suppose that the span will disappear when I do something like this and I tab out. And yeah, so this comment means that that span is not there anymore, and now it's back. This is pretty nice. One thing I do want to do right off the bat is instead of doing text red, I might have something like an error color and a success color in my Tailwind config, and that way I can do something like text error instead of text red. Just pull in red here. Yep. Random input, and this should be error, and that works. Fantastic. Okay. That's looking really nice to me right now, but this structure won't really work for everything. For example, if we have a select, it might not work right off the bat. If we have different types of fields, it probably won't work. But let's see what we can do. I'm pretty happy with how things are turning out so far. So let me make this location in our app component a random input as well. The name is location. I no longer need to do this, which is kind of the whole point. And now I do want to pass it. I guess I'll have errors in the console because label is a required prop. But actually, let me leave the label out, right? Because just to show the types of neat things we could potentially do. So if I do something like props dot, I think this is how I get props dot name in here, just to make sure that I know I did this before, but there is a weirdness. Right, so these are my props. And let me also output my adders just to see if there's a collision there. Which, what I mean is if I define something as a prop, will it also show up as an adder? My expectation is that it should not. And so this, I suppose, would be my my adders, because this is my props. And it seems like this is the case. That here I would see rules because one of the fields has rules. And these are my headers and my props. So they are separated as I would expect. So what I want here is for it to kind of guess the label based on the name of the field. So there's a few ways I can do this. Let me see if I can do something like props.label equal props.label, and if there isn't one, then use props.name. And here it doesn't like this. Do I need to say value? Nope. Because it is only a read-only property. That's fine. What we can do here is create a computed property. So I'll call this label value, for example. Let's say computed. And it will return this. Okay, and I can use my label value down here. Okay, so now it seems like it, I know I can't do that. And with this, maybe this is value? No, it's just label. I'm surprised that it's not showing up here. So let's take a look at maybe what might be happening. Label, I no longer need to make this a required field. Okay, so now it is working. I just had to refresh. That's weird. So now it's taking the name by default, which I don't exactly love. I just want location, right? Because if there's any dots in there, I think we can make the assumption that it's the last section. So let's do this. Dot split by a dot. And I'm going to do something super dirty here. I'll reverse it and just grab the first object. And now that's looking nice. I do want to make it appear a bit nicer by default. So I want to capitalize it. And I wonder if Lodash has a capitalize or start case. And I can pull in something like a Lodash. You don't have to, of course, if you don't want all this bulk, but I also don't want to I don't want to spend the time writing these functions, and so I'm happy to use them. So let me add Lodash. And we can replace it with any other library if you're like, oh, Lodash is, no good for whatever reasons. I believe Lodash makes this available, so we don't have to pull in all of Lodash. We can just simply get capitalize. I think that should work. And then we would use it here. And now when we go back, I would expect location to be capitalized. That's nice because I no longer have to pass that in. Let me see what happens if I remove this. Now I'm getting something like this, and I believe Lodash has what they call start case instead of capitalize, and that will just capitalize the, I'll split it up. nicely, and then I'll just capitalize both the and now this, yeah, that's amazing. This is coming from the name by default, so I don't have to pass in the label. Okay, but you might say, okay, what happens if I don't want a label? Right? I don't want it. And in that case, I would probably say something like, if you pass in false in your label, it should not show up. So, which means that if it's explicitly false, so I might say something like props.label. I don't necessarily have to do that. I could just say don't show this if props. So show only if props.label is not actually false in and of itself. This will give me an error, I believe, because the type check is failing. So let's fix that up by saying, oops. Yeah, really, it's not, I mean, it won't ever be a Boolean. It'll just be false. And so I never get it. So I don't have to define this as a true-false dynamic. And then that's good enough, right? So now, although I don't understand why, I would have expected to see it here. So why is that happening? If props.label is not false, and I'm pretty sure it isn't. For location label false, it is. Why? I did not say, I don't have a label. If it's not here, then it's false. So that might not work. That's interesting. Is it being defaulted to false because I defined it that way? So let's find out. So if I make this a string, will it just be an empty string? So let's refresh just to make sure. And here, that's fascinating. It seems here that label is undefined, which I thought that it would be, but view seems to, because I define it as false, view seems to be, so it's false up here. I leave it empty and I say, or false. And now view defines this as false. Not my expectation at all. What if I now actually say Boolean? Will it be undefined or will it also be false? It's still false. I am thoroughly unhappy with that. Just to make sure that one component isn't impacting the other for whatever reason. I don't think that should matter. I think both of these will be false now. Which is no good because the whole point was to automatically pick up the label. Okay. I'm surprised at this functionality. I wouldn't think that like I want to know if I didn't want an undefined, I would have left it like this, right? Saying, hey, it's required. And what if I say or undefined here? Although this doesn't make sense because I don't know, I don't get it. I don't get it. No, it's no good. It's required. I don't want it to be required, but I also don't want it to default to false. And that's not how I recall. I believe this is a functionality of defined props and script setup, because I don't recall this happening either in, in the non-script setup view API. That's unfortunate. I don't want to spend too much time figuring this out. So I will say do this. And if you don't want, so I expect these to come back. Okay, and if you don't want one, let's say label equals false. And I don't love this, but you know, I'll just make this a string. And so if your string is false, it won't show, which is thoroughly a shame. But this is what we'll do for now. And now we're kind of building our form component or input component to have this functionality that we would expect to have. I don't like this. I don't like how if I tap out of it, it automatically shows the error. So let's take a look to see how we can disable that. Okay, let's take a look. It would be in the field. I thought it would just show me the field component, but it isn't. So let me just, I'm just clicking around at this point. Field. So I expect it to have some options on how to handle validation, and I don't want to do validation right off the bat. So validate on mount, no, I don't want that. Validate on input, which means the moment you start typing, it starts validating. Validate on change, which is if the change event is triggered. I think that's fine. Validate on blur, which is probably what's happening here, and the default is true. And I don't want this to happen. So, and I don't really even want to make this like an option. Just want to hard code it here. Okay, so the reason I did this, by the way, is I'm assuming that if validate on blur exists on here, that it will override this. I don't know if that's true, but let's actually find out. Okay, so if I say false here and I'm not passing it in up here, then I expect this as I tab out not to have an error. Great. But what if I do validate on blur equals true here? Will this being placed after this make this an overwrite? And it will. And will this undo that? Which means will this value now override this value? And it will. That's fantastic. So now we made it so that you can't even override it. But of course, this makes sense if I wanted it to be configurable by individual field. And this makes sense if I'm like, nah, you don't have that option. So let me just do this. So great. Now, if you know the underlying field is like this, great. You got it. You can configure it. Even though I said I didn't want to make it configurable, but why not? It's not hurting anyone. So great. I mean, I don't think I will want something exactly like this. But let's see. Let me add the help bit that we were talking about earlier. So what I'll do is I'll say help is an optional string, and we'll take this and we'll just make it a P for now, and we'll see if that's appropriate. And this will say help. If, of course, you have passed in help. So if it has a value, I don't need this anymore. And yeah, I don't want it to be an error, but maybe I can make it a text gray 700, so it's not pure black, and I do want it to be small. So if I added something like help equals, you know, the name of your company, even the check on this is email, but so now I'm getting this little nice little help thing which I can pass in without having to do that for every single field. And that's sort of what we're copying from here. That works. I think I'm happy with this as it is so far. And I think I'm ready to commit what I have here. Seems like I'm no longer, yeah, I've extracted this stuff, so I'm no longer using this. I am using field array. I got values coming in. I have this validate email function, which is fine. I'll leave that there, and we'll replace this with yep soon. Let me see what I've changed. I've added a random input component. Let's see why this is complaining. Because I don't have types, so let's add the types. Okay, so, well, that is still complaining. Maybe it's because I'd have to do it for each one. Like, is there like a start case or like a dash start case or a start case? Is there a slash? I'm just grasping at straws here. Underscore. I don't know why I did that. Maybe just an underscore. I'm just guessing here. I'll stop. That's fine. You know what? I wonder if it builds. I might find other errors here because I do have a bunch of different things that aren't. But I'm not getting an error for the start case. So it's really just that I don't have a definition and it's an implicit any for my values. So let me just go make that explicit. And really I need to find out what values, because I mean, I don't really want to make it unknowns. But let's see what I can do. I'll try and figure something out for this later. But for now, any it is, and this actually is a string, so that's fine. And that does build, so the error really is isolated. So I'll just leave that be for now. If it was a compilation error where it didn't compile, then I would maybe spend some time correcting that, but I don't feel the need to do that right now. Okay, so let's see. I've added a random input component. I've designed sort of a layout for my input. Although this only works with input components. So for example, I can't have a select in here. Not exactly as I would have wanted. I can't have a toggle in here yet. So there's a few things we can't do, and I want to do some more abstraction here later. Maybe next. Maybe I'll just, maybe I'll jump into it next. This I don't need to do a diff. I've added a Lodash and a Vee-Validate. Looks fine to me. And here, this is just I'm using the components that we've built. Random form has changed now to use Vee-Validate's form component, and I still don't like this any, but I'm gonna live with it for now, and later we can fix that up because I don't want to, jump into typing concerns. and I'm adding a random input. I might not prefix all these with random. That seems weird because I'm expecting like a random input, just saying the name. But again, like it's okay for now. All right, cool. We have a little hint here. What else? Got my labels going. Maybe the labels can be the same size, but I think that's okay for now. Okay, we've played around with Vee-Validate just in terms of initializing it. We've created an input layout, but I'm not too happy with its limitations, so extend input layout is something we'll have to do later. So maybe now I can play a little bit around with yup or Zod, as is the description here. Let me take a look at these integrations to see what they are. So Zod is schema validation, and it's a drop-in replacement for yup. You could do so with Vee-Validate Zod. Is Zod a... why does it say at Vee-Validate Zod? Because it seems like it's a wrapper or something around Zod itself. And here what it means is that instead of defining a function specifically, we can pass in a schema defined by this validation library called Zod. So I guess I won't start with Zod, maybe actually let's just start with yup and see if they have yup described here. And they say visit the guide section, but it doesn't exist. That's fine. Let's yup seems to be on this page a lot, and now we can figure out how to use yup. Right, so we can define a function and return a yup definition. And yup is a fairly comprehensive library that defines your objects and your validations. So here we go. We can define, name is a string and it's required, and age is a positive integer, and website is nullable, and so forth. And that will run validations. You could do it manually by running the schema.validate function, but Vee-Validate manages that for us as defined here, where if we pass, so instead of defining a password rules function ourselves, we can define the yup value. There is also form level validation, which is great. So instead of defining the validation at the field level, which we could do if we wanted, and we'll start off with that, we can define an overall schema and pass in the schema object. But the schema object can be an entire yup object. So we can define yup.object and define the entire object. So in our case, it might be company name and location. And location wouldn't be required, but we can define it as a string. So like it's not a number. Let's play around with this a little bit to see what kind of things we can extract from it and what we can learn from it. Okay, so let's go up to the original example. And I guess I will have to add yup. And I don't know if yep is TypeScript, but I'm just going to take a chance here and assume it's not. Okay, so that worked. So seems like types yep, my guess was correct. I can come back in here and in my app.view where I have defined my form, I can begin to replace this validate email. I wonder if yep has an email validation, and it does, so I can do something like string.email. Importing string from yep, so let's do that. So instead of grabbing all of yep, let's do something like import string from yep. And then can I do, so I guess let me try string dot email here, and I guess but how did they define it here? So well, it's not a function, it's just a computed value, because data computed-ish value. So I should just be able to do something like this, and just get rid of this entirely, and just have this be a const, right? So that's the equivalent, saying this like this, and I mean, it's not really computed, but it's kind of computed because it's in the data function, kind of. So this replacement should actually work. So now it should continue to validate the email. So if I submit this, it works. But if I submit this, it ought not work. Then it doesn't. Although why it's ignoring my blur. No, it is ignoring my don't validate on blur. Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that. But I won't get into that for now. The idea is that this must be a valid email. This entire string is coming from yep. And it's not happening when it's empty, so I can do something like this, where I define this with a required. Oops, required. And now I would expect, do I need to refresh? I would have expected this not to work. That's, you know, that is frustrating and weird. So when I tab out, the required doesn't trigger because I'm assuming that on blur is validated. It's because the on change. That makes sense. I apologize to whomever, which is the validated on change may be something that I want to disable as well. So if I go into my random input, validated on change is false, and you know, if you don't want that to happen, you can override it. And now if I type in a name, it doesn't validate until I submit the form. That's nice, actually. For certain things, I would probably want an instant validation, and for others, I would want something else. So, for example, for a username, I would want to tell you that your username is taken without you having to fill out this long form. But maybe for some other things, I don't want to immediately bug you and, you know, change the height of the form and everything. So if I say example.com, resubmit, the submit works. That's great. So now we sort of have this, without writing a whole lot of code, we can define the idea of our validation for our fields. We can also do something like this, So let me look at how arrays are defined here. I was hoping to see an example of an array that was, well, frankly, usable. Here, there we go. So we can say, hey, I have an array of something. So in my case, I have an array of companies. So I can say something like, hey, I'm going to define an entire schema. And my schema is an object, which will be what the form returns as values. And let's see how object is defined here in Yep. So I can define an object. And my object has a value or a field called companies, which is, this over here. And companies is an array.auth, another object. And this object contains a company name and a location. So I could probably replace this with validate email, because I've literally defined this over here. And then this is also a string, and we'll just say it's a string. It's, it's not required. Let's make it required. So we see a difference in the form, and I need to import object and array from Yep. And so instead of defining rules here, I would define a validation schema, just to make sure that I have the right thing. Let me I suspect the example will be here somewhere. There you go, validation schema. And in my case, I just called it schema. So now when I go back, I would expect me not to have made any errors, first of all. So my error here is what? Are you serious? Comma expected where? Here? I'm missing something so obvious, probably. Schema is equal to object. Okay, that's happy. Array.of object. Okay, so there it is. What am I doing with my life? So this object is here, which means this needs to be like this. Great. I should have known that when the auto completion didn't, or the auto formatting didn't work. Okay. Now back here, when I submit, I expect this to be required, both of them to be required. And that didn't work at all. So because I put my validation in the field they're in, not the form. Now when I come here and I submit, I expect there to be an error. This is unfortunate. And I wish there was a nice way of representing this. But I don't believe there is. What we can do is define it in Yup itself. So none of these examples have it, but I believe the examples in this will. So let me go back to components, validation, find Yup. And they don't have it here, but they will probably have it in the, no, they don't have it here either. They have it somewhere on this page. And I definitely don't. Is it label? Yeah, it is. Okay. So here in this case, we could do something like label location. And I kind of wish there was a way to indicate, hey, just, take the name here. So now when I go back and I submit, this says location as a required field. And I wonder why this didn't work as I was expected. Do I need to explicitly have everything over here? Like this? Is that what it wants from me? No, that doesn't seem to be working at all. Because it's a setting dot company name. Thank you. So here I would have to say is an object. Not this is an object, sorry. I would have to say setting. I mean, I could just rename company, but I'd rather define this properly. Just to demonstrate how validation can happen at sort of multiple layers of an object. So this validation now will occur on settings.company name. And that works, and we can add a label here as well. That works because there's no real check to say that this object, this array is required. So I wonder if I can say something like required array of. That maybe doesn't make sense because I might have to over here say required. Can I do that? Yeah, required does seem to be a method on here. And now when I submit this form, it doesn't submit, although there's no error message because there's no field to display the error message for. Like companies isn't a field in and of its own. That's interesting. But for now, I won't delve into that. So companies is an array of blah, 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 and that works nicely. And this is now company name must be a valid email. I probably want my errors to show below the help. So let me do that. And that seems a bit more, seems nicer, I guess. Okay, I think this will work now because I can now probably do something like validate email dot label company name. And now when I submit, the error shows up. Okay, so that only happened because in order to demonstrate this like multi-layered object, I added settings to show the nesting. Okay, we have validations using Yap, which is a fully feature-rich library that we could do multiple things, right? Like we have a default value, we can required, not required, optional, not one of these values, needs to be one of these values. And then you could also have custom functions. So you could say, oh, this is, and you can define something here. So, and they can be async as well, which is great because if you wanted to validate that username in real time as you tab out, you would say validate on change is true, and then you would pass in an async yup test definition, where in which you could define whatever you want in here. And so it would go in and do our user check. This looks great to me. Already now we're seeing our library shape up where we're using yup out of the box, passing it into a random form, and voila, we have a validated form. What's awesome about this, again, is that yup can be used if you're using JavaScript on the server side. This can be in some shared library in a mono repo. And you can now share your validations both across the back end and the front end, so that your API actually is still validating and returning errors. And maybe we'll do some of that later in one of the next sessions. Is we'll take we'll create a backend and remove the validations here from the front end and still have submit and all this work so that the error messages are returned from our server and are still displayed in our form using this. So let me add that to the list. But before that, we'll probably have to do a lot of other things. I want to get checkboxes in here. I want to get selects in here. I want to do something like this, where we take Viewform Multi-Select, which is a component out there, a component library. Yeah, they have a site. Although this will be a larger site. Let me see if they just have a demo up front here somewhere. Yep. Right, so the demo of this multi-select option would look something like this. So they just have a nice little, it's already sort of styled and everything, but not just that. Multi-select would look like this, for example. Right? You can have multi-select with disabled options. It's sort of a very rich multi-select library. You can have tags. That's pretty cool. You could have autocomplete. Ruby coming in through an async await function in options. And so on and so on. So you can make it autocomplete by searching for things that even aren't async, for example. So if I was to type in Java here, anyway, it's a very feature-rich component, and I want to be able to wrap it around, the label, error messages, and everything. So this bit here will need to be modifiable, let's just say, and we'll do it by perhaps creating a, instead of having just a random input, we might have random checkbox, random select, random multi-select, and so forth. So really improving the features in the library. So for now, I'll go ahead and add that to the list here. So we did create it. We want to extend it for checkboxes, selects, multi-select, viewform, for example, or any other component that you wanted, right? The idea is you should be able to pluck any component that's out there in Vue, wrap it around our form input layout, and have it behave in the way that you would expect it to. And then, so we used yup for validation, that's done. And I want server-side validation showing errors in the form at some point. Yeah. Okay. So the next time we'll probably start off with something like this, which is we're extending the input layout so we can have multiple types of components and start to make our form library fairly rich and usable out of the box. Cool. So this time it also seems like my other screen has